in chapter 11. We're going to look and read these first 4 verses. It says, now the leaders of the people dwelt in Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, at the holy city, and 9/10 were to dwell in other cities. And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem. These are the heads of the province who dwelt in Jerusalem. But in the cities of Judah, everyone dwelt in his own possession in their cities. Israelites, priests, Levites, Nethinim, the descendants of Solomon's servants. Also in Jerusalem dwelt some of the children of Judah and of the children of Benjamin. So when we look in here, what we have to understand is that the Jews desired a strong nation. That was what they wanted. They wanted a strong nation. What kind of nation or what kind of strong nation would we just assume that most people want to live in? What is it that makes a nation strong? Military? Okay. Any other things?
Families makes the nation.
Families makes the nation strong. Good leaders. These are all things that'll make a nation strong. God needs to be in the midst of it all, right? Yes. Yeah, for sure. He needs to be. Yeah. We need strong leaders, don't we? Yeah. When we're thinking of a strong nation, nations whose government, I mean, these are some things that I would like to see, and I'm sure we would like to see, that we have a nation whose government truly serves the people. And can you imagine if our nation truly served the people? If the leaders in our nation truly served the people and not served themselves? Things would look a lot different, wouldn't they? We would be a stronger nation. We'd be a stronger nation if we, if the government followed morality or followed after righteousness. And can you imagine if this was the center of their thoughts and their programs and the way that things were done and carried out was that morality and righteousness had to be evident in everything that we do? If we had a guiding principle to where everyone wanted to follow this guiding principle and not want to change it, a government that established true justice. This sounds like a very strong nation, doesn't it? When we think of these things, these things, along with what you shared, we would have a strong nation. Now, why is it that we would really want this? What's so important that we would want this? It would be good for everyone. When I would do good, evil is always present. You know what this nation will provide, if we have this kind of nation, this strong of a nation, it'll produce a strong economy. Can you imagine if the plumb line for our nation was righteousness and morality? Then we would have a strong economy. Certain people wouldn't care only about filling their pockets no matter what it cost other people. Is that not right? That's the way it would be. We would have a strong enough economy to where jobs were providing sufficient livelihoods for its citizens. Citizens would be protected and they'd be able to live in peace. And we all want that. I don't know anyone who desired to have to put an alarm system on their home. Almost everyone who had to spend the money to put an alarm system on their home done it begrudgingly or done it after they had been broke in and they figured this is something they have to do, or they do it when they're building their homes just to protect it. It's an added expense. Nobody desires to do this. It's just something we feel we need today. What about the citizens, our property? Wanting our property took care of. We don't want it destroyed. We don't want people to come and just take it just because they feel like they can. Or maybe they feel like they deserve it. I think if we had this kind of nation, one thing we wouldn't have to worry about is taxes. We wouldn't have to worry about those things. Because there are some areas of the country where people are being taxed to death, and some areas where they're not. And it's just a matter of the leaders in that area and what they want. And so we see this is the kind of nation that we would desire. But we have to also have to consider what it takes to have a nation like this. A nation like this doesn't just happen. There is a great sacrifice that has to take place to have a nation such as this. A nation is made up of its citizens. And if we want a great nation, then we got to have great citizens. Yeah, we got to have the laws, but if we've got people, the laws aren't for the righteous, the laws are for the unrighteous. So if we got great citizens, the laws would be in place to where they could where things would be done. Anybody other than me think that something's wrong with our legal system? Because when people can break in your home and be out the next day after being arrested for breaking into your home, something's wrong with that. It doesn't matter whose child it is, or whose husband, or whose son. If they're breaking into someone's home and they're caught, they shouldn't be out on the street the next day.
That's what the Bible says, woe unto lawyers, good reason.
I agree. I agree.
Well, it's not just the lawyers, it's the judges.
The judges.
Well, you know, he was a lawyer at one time.
I get.
Congress, Senate, all them was lawyers.
Yeah, well, yeah, that and your those folks who are advocating up there in Washington, yeah, the whole system is broken. The entire system is just broken, and we have to acknowledge that. But without people, no nation exists. So the nation that we have is based upon the people that we have in the nation. Southern Baptist Convention, y'all know it's the largest denomination, Protestant denomination in the United States, right? Yeah, it's the largest Protestant denomination. We're part of it. But you know what makes up the Southern Baptist Convention? The Baptist State Conventions. The Baptist State Conventions in every state that has one, that makes up the Southern Baptist Convention. What makes up the Baptist State Conventions are the local associations that are within that state. What makes up that local association are the churches, the Baptist churches that are part of that association. So, without the churches, we don't have a state convention. Without the churches, we don't have a local association. We don't have a state convention. Neither do we have a Southern Baptist Convention. So the Southern Baptist Convention, many of our church leaders can trash it, but it is what our churches are. That's a hard pill to swallow. But it is. It's made up of churches. So whatever the churches are and the church leaders, that's what our convention is.
I understand they're talking about doing some things. I don't know,
Exactly. Exactly. They are. And then we have to decide if we're going to be part of it. But that is who we are. When we say we're part of this, we're part of the convention. Same with the nation. We make up the nation. We have one way that we have one voice, and that voice is to vote. It ain't our voice to be out in the street. It's our voice to put down on paper. And that voice is to vote. And that voice, whatever voice we say we want in the positions that lead, that's what we're getting. And that's who we are. No, we don't agree with everything that they do. We don't agree with everything these elected officials do. But we make up the nation. And if we have a weak nation, chances are we got weak citizens. If we got a strong nation, chances are we got strong citizens. It depends on how we're looking at it. Really, yeah. My real question in studying this and looking at this is, how strong has the church been with everything going on within our nation? Now, what I do know is no matter what's going on around us, our duty is to be the church. No matter what's going on around us, our duty is to be the light of Christ. We are to reflect Him, regardless of what's going on around us. We don't have the right or the privilege to get so caught up in all the chaos to where we are no longer bearing the light of Christ. We don't have that privilege. Not as born-again believers. So no matter what's taking place, we reflect Christ. But our country is going in the direction it's going because people have been voted into office who are ungodly people.
That is the thing. I'm sure there's people that say they're Christians that vote for people because of the promises they make, not because of morals. Morals. They don't care what kind of person they are morally, what they're promising people. Vote for it. They think it's going to help them.
And I found out recently that a lot of people vote on party instead of policy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a huge misconception that you can vote this party and you stand for this. All of the parties the Republican Party puts this picture up for votes. That's all they put them up there for, is for votes. The Democratic Party puts this picture up, and it's for votes. They know people are on one side or the other, but when we get to read about the people, when we get to read about the person, and finding out where they voted in the past, what they've stood for in the past, then we get a real idea of who we're voting for. Because no one without support of something gets to these national leadership positions. They've had to support something. And when we find that out, we got a country, and I'll say this, and it doesn't matter who sees it on Facebook to me. We got a country who was bombed by a particular religious group of people, and we're putting that same religious group in our leadership to make our policies, and they hate us. They hate us. And our country, our citizens, are putting those people in position. And it's weakening our nation.
What do you know too? Where do you stand when it comes to God?
Yeah.
Where do you stand? Are you standing with what the word says or what your party says? You know what I'm saying? And I'm telling you, God was let down in his last election. I mean, mightily. I've talked to some of my family, and I just downright told them. I said, well, I'm here to tell you, if you vote for, and I'll just call his name Biden, what kind of Christian are you? You know what I'm saying? How can you stand for God when you're standing here saying you're going to vote for a man that believes and got people behind him that a baby cannot be aborted at any point in time?
Yeah, I can't.
You know? And they said, well, I don't want my babies aborted. I said, that's what you're going to put in office.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want it, but you're voting to do it. Have it done.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And on the flip side of that, his opponent is not presidential. You know, and you know what? And the country had said, we're tired of these politicians who are slick with words. We're tired of these folks who are able to manipulate. We get someone in there that's not slick with words, and the whole country goes against him. Did he do some things that he shouldn't have done? Yes. He said a lot he shouldn't have said, but his policies were for the country. And I expected him to have been assassinated, to be honest. I was voting for the vice president myself. But thank God he wasn't. You know, thank God he wasn't. I wouldn't wish that on nobody. I was just expecting it. But it's amazing. It's just amazing how we, and I'm talking about myself, we can be quick to just say, well, you know what, our country is going, our country's just going in the wrong direction. Well, let's not forget, we make up our nation. We really do. And that's just something we can't get past. As our citizens go, as the people go, so goes the nation. If the citizens are moral and we live moral, clean lives, we take a stand on morality, then the nation becomes a moral nation. Moral people build moral nations. We're not going to build moral nations putting immoral people in office.
If you look at the citizenry, though, other than, let's say, I mean, I know North Carolina has a lot of nationalities too. When you go up north and down in Florida, look at all those different people that God is not their God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're voting too.
Yeah. Yeah, they're voting, and they make up the majority of our country. You ever wonder why? Do we ever wonder why the lost is making up the majority of the country?
Every empire has fallen.
Say that again.
Every empire has fallen.
Every empire has fallen. That's true. And I think at some point it's going to be the same way here. We know that a lot of things have to happen. We know a lot of things have to happen. We don't know when they're going to happen, but a lot of things have to happen. I think the best days of our country is behind us.
Especially when our president's begging people for stuff. And when do you ever see anyone care? I mean, the United States of America begging someone.
Yeah.
You know, when you have to see the big leader ask these people down here and beg them for something.
Yeah.
That's where we were supposedly at.
Well, it's flipped. It's no longer that they're serving us. It's that we must serve them.
But you know what the Bible says, portion times, we won't see gas come down, we won't see groceries come down, we won't see everything get better. But what does the word say?
It's going to get worse. You know, now, if this is the same, if this is right, if we want to see a moral country, then we've got to be moral citizens, same way in righteousness, right? It's the same thing. If we live righteous lives, we take stands, against wickedness, against lawlessness, against violence, then the nation becomes stronger and it becomes more righteous. Righteous people build righteous nations.
And that's why, even you said there was 1/10, only 1/10 that would stay in the city, and then they had to cast lots. It was why they were made to stay there. Why? Because they knew where they were at.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get to that. Those who were made, we're going to get there. If the people treat others as they want to be treated, which is justly and fairly, we all want to be treated. Nobody wants to be treated unjustly. Nobody wants to be treated unfairly. But if we treated others the way we want to be treated, then we become more of a just society. It's only then that the dignity of humans, the dignity of human life and respect for property becomes honored. It's without some sort of righteousness, without some sort of just society, the society as a whole will not be that. What builds a strong nation is a moral, righteous people who executes justice among themselves. If the church is being everything that we need to be, then we're going to stand out. We're going to stand out from the rest of the world. The first century Christians stood out because they did what was right. And they were separated. And we today, in the 21st century, we still must be separated from the world. When the world sees us, they need to see that we're different, that we're not the same. This young couple that we've helped here recently, I talked with them. And I talked with them yesterday, and their words to me was, we've never had help like this. Family, no, they went a year with no lights. You're talking about winter and summer. And there weren't family that could help, neighbors that were helping, there weren't no one that could help. And they were just blown away and moved emotionally by what we've done. And we the church must be set apart. We can't be like the world. There must be something about us, about the church, that people see that, they're different than us. We need to find out why. We need to find out about that. And when the church, and I'm talking about the church universal, I'm not talking about a local congregation. When it is like that, then we start seeing congregations flooded with people. Remember in the 70s, I think 70s and early 80s, maybe middle 80s, your revivals were filled up with lost people. They, in our area, in Robinson County at least, revivals all around were just filled up with lost people. And you can count on one hand, unless the lost are coming with mama and daddy because they're forcing them to come. You can almost count on one hand in most churches at revival time how many people are lost. Now, revivals used to be where it was evangelistic. Now it's pastoral. The messages that are preached, a lot of them are pastoral. Well, we get here. If we know this is where we are, then can you imagine the problems that were confronting Nehemiah? How could Jerusalem construct a strong nation? The Jews had just returned home. They were weak. They had very few resources. They were considered enemies to everyone who was surrounding them. And instead, even in the midst of all of that, Nehemiah finished the wall in 52 days. And immediately after rebuilding the walls, the Jews began to rebuild their lives by focusing their lives on God's word. They began seeking revival, and then they made the renewed commitment by agreeing to a covenant to honor God and His word. Well, now that the Jews had committed to honoring God and His word, it's time to focus on rebuilding the nation. So the city of Jerusalem was large and it was spacious. With the wall of the city completed, there was a need now for people to move inside the walls. There was a need for houses to be constructed inside the walls. People were living on land and property that had been theirs for generations. And now they're back home and they're moved back to their property. They're moved back to their family land. And because they moved back to their family land, they haven't come in the city. Well, there was another reason why they hadn't come in the city. That was everything inside was rubble. It was just block and brick and mortar, and it was land everywhere. They had moved enough around to build the wall and to build the houses for the leaders that were already inside the city. But for the people to move in, they were going to have to leave their land, their property, grandma, granddaddy's property, and they were going to have to move. And there's a lot that always comes with moving. Well, so there was going to have to be a massive cleanup. It was going to have to take place. And Scripture says that leaders already lived in the city, as we see there in verse 1, but there was no real population. The housing that was within the city was inadequate. Well, Nehemiah instituted two policies to help guarantee that they could repopulate Jerusalem. And we see that in these first two verses. One was they were going to cast lots. Now, 1 out of every 10 citizens would be chosen to live in Jerusalem, while the rest of the population would remain in their cities and villages. Now, inside the city walls, there was limited space. So they were choosing as they cast lots. In casting lots, they were doing this to try to figure out who out of these 10, if these 10 volunteered, who could come, depending on the number within their tribes. People weren't flocking to it. People they weren't actually excited about this. However, when they cast these lots, the lots were usually made of small stones or metal or wood. And they would cast them, and somehow it would be used to determine whatever decision or selection was being made. The result of the casting lots would be assumed that this is God's will. And we can find some of this. Yeah, we can find some of this in in Proverbs 16 and 33, where it says the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. But every decision is from the Lord. So this was one process of casting lots so that people would know that they were able to come into the city if they chose. But then there was an appeal that was made to the people to step up and volunteer to move into Jerusalem. We see that there in verse 2. Some did volunteer, and those that volunteered were highly commended. They volunteered to move out of the home they were in, move inside of the city. They were willing to get rid of all the rubble that was there and build a new house. And they were highly commended for it. We often see people who have a home, and we'll wonder, why are you building another home? We don't we? They have a home. It seems to be fairly nice, but it's not what they wanted. Maybe it's smaller than what they wanted, or maybe it's just not set up right. They've got the finance. They're able to sell that and move somewhere else. And why are they doing that? We question that. Here, these people were on their property, that was their family property, that was passed down from generation to generation to generation. And they're commended for leaving that property and going to stay inside the city. Part of it was they understood that moving is a taxing experience. If you've ever moved, and I don't know anyone here who lives in the original home in which they grew up in and has never moved out, but it's taxing, isn't it? I never want to build another house. As a matter of fact, I don't want to have to pack up everything that's in my house to carry somewhere else. That would be a job. Just packing up my building would be a major job. I'd hate to have to do that, and that's what these people were facing. It's such a taxing experience, it causes hesitation and fear within people. Just moving. So when individuals move, it's a complete change of environment. It's a new home. It's neighbors who are new, friends who are going to be new. Usually it means new jobs, a different climate, unfamiliar surroundings. I live less than a mile from where I grew up, and I've been fine with that. The one guy that I hung out with most in school lives across the field from me. There's something valuable about familiarity. And it can be challenging when we do move away. And for these returned exiles, the change had to be even more difficult. For they were leaving their homes, they were leaving their property. But nevertheless, some understood where others didn't, that a strong nation meant sacrifice. And this was going to be a sacrifice for them. Those that really understood that it was a sacrifice and were willing to make it, they were highly commended by the people. I'm trying to find the exact words. There in verse 2 it says, "And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered themselves to dwell in Jerusalem." Well, note here they call it a holy city in verse 1. It said that they cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9/10 were to dwell in the other cities. They deemed it, or they called this Jerusalem, a holy city. The city was considered to be holy because it had been chosen by God as the city where God would place his name. It was the place where God's temple would be built. There wasn't a temple on every corner like there are churches today. There was the city in Jerusalem. And that's why the people called it a holy city. Now, the descendants of various family members, family leaders who settled in Jerusalem, we see those are being recorded from verse 3 to verse 9. From the tribe of Judah, there were 468, and they called them valiant men. Valiant men. The family leaders from the tribe of Benjamin was listed in verses 7 through 9. And the descendants totaled 928 men who were led by the chief officer named Joel and his assistant Judah. Again, this was a great sacrifice for these men to leave the land that they had known as their home, the land of their family, to move into the city, or we would call it the city limits of Jerusalem. They faced not only this having to establish a new life, but also a major cleanup, and they were faced with rebuilding the city. You know what a lot of teenagers coming out of high school do in the city of Roland and Fairmont? If they can, they go off to college. And they go off to college, many of them don't come back. I remember in my early 20s coming through Fairmont, and I remember 2 or 3 car dealerships. I remember 2 plants that were open and going. The tobacco warehouse was flourishing. Going to go play golf, I would just ride through. The storefronts on Main Street were all open. And now many of them are closed. There's not a car dealership in the middle of town. Those plants, they're not functioning, are they? Where there was a Hardee's and McDonald's, Hardee's left. It's been replaced with a Mexican restaurant, local family establishment. Where Roland, at one time, I just found this out. They had a theater. The motels were full. They had about 7 stores right there on 301. I didn't realize that till this weekend. A conversation with Brother Larry. What wiped that out was 95. 95 killed it. Because all the traffic had to come through Roland. Now, kids, we understand why kids who grew up in Roland would go off to school and not come back, because they don't see opportunity. They don't see how they could build the town up, or they don't see how they can make the living that they would want to make. Here, they're faced with some of this. How are we going to rebuild everything? We're starting from scratch. And so we have to understand why it was a little challenging for them to want to come and stay inside of the walls of Jerusalem. Yeah, they were protected more than if they were outside of the walls. But at least at home, they had their farms and they had their produce, and they were able to sell what they could grow. In town, it wasn't the same. But people did volunteer. The reason people did volunteer was because of the strong leaders that they had. They had witnessed what Nehemiah had helped them do and what Ezra had helped them to do. They had been part of that. And so here, strong godly leaders, we can see that they're needed in every community, every city, every state, in every nation. We need strong godly leaders. Seeing leaders tackle massive problems is a strong reminder that godly leaders are needed to establish and strengthen any city or society. When the godly leaders vacate something, that tells us we might need to vacate it also. Something's not going in the right direction. You know that when the tribe, when it started, they were breaking away from LRDA, there was no trust in LRDA. So they wanted to start the tribal government. They went to churches to get the pastors on board and get the church leaders on board, so that the Lumbee tribal government could be started with godly men. And they're at this point, and I'm not saying there's not godly men in there, but we've got to look at what we have among our tribal. We have 50,000 members, and we had 3,000 people vote on an election for the tribal chair. And I'll admit, I didn't vote.
That's what happened, especially with the antics that took place.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last one.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I just found out this evening, I just voted and stuff. We're not on EMC.
Yeah.
The guy that was in there, they had just hired, and they did a contract with him, when they fired him.
Yeah.
Now they got to pay his contract back, which is $1 million, so
I'm not on Lumbee River either. So I worked contracted with them for several years, but I'm not on their system. And decisions are made when we put people in these positions who have agendas, and we see it not just in the national government, but we see it in local government. If we don't have being a strong godly leader doesn't mean, we got 7 men on the committee who are Christians. That's not what that means. It means men, women who are not only Christians, but they stand for what is right. They're moral, they're righteous, they're just, and they're not going to accept anything different. They're not going to just go along. And I think, to be honest, when you meet people who are refusing to just go along, it's in their DNA. It's really in their DNA. They've been raised that you don't just go along no matter what. It's not in your DNA to retreat. It's in your DNA to stand for what's right.
Yes, man.
Because when money is passed around, it changes the hearts and minds of people. It's not that money is the root of evil, but it's the love of it. The love of it. And that's what happens when we don't have strong, godly leaders. They're needed. Without strong, godly leadership, no people will thrive. Not for long, anyway. Not for long periods of time. Our country has thrived for a long time, but sooner or later, if things don't change, we're going to start seeing the fall of our country. Economics, culture, societies, governments, judicial systems suffer greatly without strong leadership. I'm going to let us go. Here's some verses to back this up. 2 Samuel 23:3 says, the God of Israel said, the rock of Israel, he spoke to me. That's what Samuel was saying. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. Psalm 2:10-11. Now therefore be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Proverbs 21:3 says, to do righteously and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. And Micah 6:8 says, he has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. If we have people who follow these 4 verses, we have strong, godly leaders. And if we're not going to have them in the world, we definitely need them in the church, don't we? And we need godly leaders who will not be afraid to stand and serve. Not stand and hold positions, but stand and serve. Serve the people. That's what the deacons' positions are about, aren't they, Brother Curley? We serve the church. That's what any pastor who says it's my church, no, you're there to serve the church. Now there are some pastors, it is their church. They founded it. It's in their name. Believe it or not, it's in their name. And they're going to make all the decisions. I'm just not seeing where that's biblical, and I won't be a part of it. We need godly leaders. We need godly leaders in Sunday school classes, godly leaders in Vacation Bible School, godly leaders in every facet of the church.
I believe I know what you were talking about. A while ago when you said years ago, during revivals, we have
evangelistic messages.
Now we have pastoral.
Mm-hmm.
What is seems like years ago, it will be something that will come by, that we get people, folks excited, they keep going, you know. Most now, it's a good service now. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking for everybody.
You're right. Well, I think the way revival services are conducted today, that we won't have evidence of revival until services are over. Because the messages that are preached to us. They're pastoral. And if they're penetrating our heart and they're doing what is that's supposed to be done, then when the series of sermons or series of services are over, then we'll go out and we'll be and do the things that we've been challenged to do in those services. That's when we can know, well, we've had true revival. If we don't see any change, if the church isn't more unified, working more together, and doing more ministry after revival, then we weren't revived. We just had a series of meetings.
We're in the church, you know, it broke it down to three days.
Yeah.
From the people that come, I understand that.
Yeah, it used to be 6 services. Well, people were choosing what 4 nights out of the 6 nights they would come. So they broke it. So we'll make it easy for you. We'll give you 4 nights. Just come these 4 nights. Well, then people started choosing 2 nights out of the 4 to come. You bring 2 preachers in 4 nights. Well, I'll go and I'll hear one on Monday, and I'll hear the other on Wednesday, or I'll come Sunday and I'll come Tuesday, or I'll come Monday and Tuesday, and that's, you know, those are just realities. And I don't know everyone's circumstance. I don't know what they're dealing with when they get home from work. I don't know what they're dealing with on their job. What I do know is that revivals should not be placed on the calendar just to place them on the calendar.
It wasn't like that when we first got saved.
Revivals there should be a call. We should be moved to revival. These folks were moved to it. They got to their homeland, and they were moved for revival. When we're moved for revival, we should have one. And if that's every fall and every spring, we should have it. But if we're not really excited about the revival time, I don't see why we should waste God's time. You know? But when we are excited about it, man, we're ready for it, geared up for it. Now the devil will do everything he can those nights to keep us from coming. We'll be wore out after work. Our kids will be aggravated us. We won't have dinner on the table when we get in. We won't be. We'll forgot to go by and pick something up so we could eat quickly and get on. Something's going to happen. Cars are going to break down. My boss has said I got to work late. Different things are going to happen. Yeah, I mean, those are excuses that are going to be used. How many times haven't we got up on Sunday morning with such a headache that we didn't want to go to church, but are so glad that we came instead of staying at home? Well, same thing happens at revival.
That's why everybody's, I'm glad it's fixed real much, die for themselves.
Yeah, aren't you? I'm glad that when I stand before the Lord, I'm giving account for me. I'd hate to know I had to die for someone else to where my deeds determined whether somebody else got in or didn't get in. Well, there'd be some pitiful people. I'm only coming in by the grace of God. I thank God for His grace, His mercy.